As a member of the Souls community, I've probably seen this conversation like 100 times. Man, Dark Souls, what a great game. It's just crazy to think it all started here.
Objection!
Actually, Demon Souls is where it really started.
And then every time
I only know this character because of Norafon, the
there's a third
cosplayer.
guy, and he metaphorically pushes up his glasses like an anime villain and says,
Actually, the real first Souls game is FromSoft's Kingsfield.
Yo, Vert, thanks for the
back
Prime.
in the 90s.
is it though? Is it really? I guess
made
we gotta
games in
play
the
it. But you
90s?
know, 25 years ago, that's a pretty long time. I only know one way to go back that far. Yeah.
Oh shit, he's taking the fucking portal. Sick.
Now first, I have to point out this logo animation at the start.
From Software, wow! In their early
Miyazaki,
days.
if you're watching, this is kind of rad as hell, so please bring this back.
Wait, yeah, true, it's actually
But
cooler!
anyway, Kingsfield, or technically Kingsfield 2. Pause real quick if you're curious why that's the case. So you immediately just gain control of your character on this beach. And yeah, from there you're free to explore. And yeah, you're free to go around and explore. Okay, Kingsfield. I see you. I see you.
Why does this look scarier than the Dark Souls games?
You know what, Kingsfield? You have my attention. I should probably
graphics.
mention the graphics before we get any further. They look pretty
Yeah,
rough,
like the
right?
liminal
But guess
space-
what?
no, it's
they
scarier.
actually look considerably worse.
He's
so I'm
eating
just playing on
soup!
an emulator with some settings
He's eating
adjusted.
soup in
With
his
how
room.
it actually looks on the PS1, this game is crunchy as hell. It certainly looks its age and then some. So for the sake of you as the audience, I thought it'd be nicer to decrunchify it with a high resolution, more stable frame rate, and no texture dithering. I totally understand if this is a grave sin to the Kingsfield purists out there, but I really think it's for the best and keeps the style and tone of the game intact. But yeah, even with this upgrade, the visuals are still pretty aged. But you know what? They actually grew on me, especially the models for the enemies and NPCs. There's just this sort of old school charm to them that I can't help but be into. Maybe it's just my RuneScape nostalgia showing, but I think it kind of works. Actually, it doesn't always work. So when I finally stopped
What? That
dying
looked
to giant
amazing.
squid
What is he
attacks, I
talking
spent the
about?
next
Yo,
15 or
Space
so
Bunny,
minutes
thanks for
just
5
running
months.
around and grabbing items and gear. And while I was running around, I very quickly had to
Sonic is
adapt
here,
to the
by the
control
way.
scheme because golly gee, this
It's
game
almost
has one.
gaming
So this is a
time.
first-person game, and the control scheme for these types of games has been standard for like 20 years at this point. You move with this stick, you
Y'all
look
want
around with this
captions?
stick. But in 1995, this wasn't the case yet. Here's the PS1 controller. I hope you can see the problem.
Yo,
so let's go
May!
over how
Thanks
Kingsfield
for
decided to
43
handle
months.
this because it's sort of interesting
Wow,
and probably the hardest
Guys,
part
that's
to
my
get used to
homie May.
while playing
Say
in
hi to
2020.
May.
Go forward, go back, turn left, turn right. Okay so far. Strafe left, strafe right, look up, look down. This definitely was uncomfortable, but I did eventually get used to it. On the topic of this being a first-person
this game
I want to
popular?
mention one more thing.
I've never
For those
heard
of you
of
that
this
know your
shit.
video game history, you'll know that the original Doom actually came out just a year and a half before
No,
Kingsfield.
I didn't think
This is
so.
notable
I was
because
just wondering.
essentially every first-person game that came out around then was compared to Doom. And if you look at some reviews that were written at the time about Kingsfield, you'll see that they mention Doom. Now this is funny to me because Kingsfield being compared to
Fucking
Doom sort of
gargoyles.
mirrors how everything is compared to Dark Souls these days. And there's something
Is
kind
he
of
Crash Bandicoot's the Dark Souls of PS4?
the combat is
What did that say?
Think about Souls these days. And there's something kind of
Oh my
poetic
god,
about that.
that's fucking
The
insane.
combat is unavoidably
What?
a big part of a game like this.
That is
so what's It
insane.
like? Now I don't want to mince words here. The combat is pretty rough and absurdly clunky. This is how the majority of combat experiences play out. You attack, back up, wait for your meter to fill up again, attack, back up, and yeah. Later on, it does get a bit more varied with multiple enemies and having to maneuver yourself around, but this is the
Dark,
core.
bro, this
Also, you do get
this
magic,
wait,
which
this
is
does
actually
look like
cool.
Dark
Early on, it's just your
Darker.
standard fireball or whatever, but by the end of the game, you
Oh
get
my
some really
God.
neat stuff like an ice dragon that homes in and traps enemies in a crystal. Genuinely cool stuff. If nothing else, the combat does do a good job of making you feel powerful by the end of the game when you're one-shotting all the old enemies. Now, all that being said, I can actually accept the combat for what it is,
This is
but
the
the
original
pause menu
Dark
UI, I don't know, man. you need to pause the game constantly. This is because you need to heal constantly. So here's what the process looks like. You pause, select items, slowly scroll down your big list of items, then use the item. This is made worse by the fact that most enemy encounters seem designed so that you sort of need to just tank damage to get through them. Anyway, it's just incredibly cumbersome and it got in the way of my fun quite a bit. So after a couple hours of playing, something dawned on me. Yes, the combat can be pretty awful, but that's not the emphasis, is it? Exploration is where the emphasis is placed. And then I realized, this game is a first-person Metroidvania. Now before you start writing an essay about how I'm wrong, hear me out. Yes, when we think of Metroidvanias, it's usually a 2D game with platforming, but look at what Kingsfield has. It's got an interconnected world, as well as obstacles and locked doors that you can only pass after getting the necessary
I still have never
items and
played Hollow
abilities.
Knight.
Once I made that connection of,
play it.
yeah, this is actually a Metroidvania, things started to click. The navigating, the backtracking, the secret
everyone tells
finding.
me to play it.
That's what this game
I
is
just haven't
about.
gotten to,
Oh, this door is locked. Oh, I got a
point where I
key
have
now
time to
for
play
it.
it.
Nice, a bow. Now I can fight that giant bug. Sick, I have a flute. Now I can use it to summon bridges of
Nintendo
light
it's
to
fine
go
to
over
react to the
gaps.
past strikes were
Metroidvania.
automatic?
Well, this
Okay.
is pretty cool. It unfortunately doesn't pair super well with the extremely samey
better
looking
to be
areas
safe,
and wall
right?
textures, with often no environmental details to help you tell which area is which. It's pretty easy to get lost. Like on one hand, yes, figuring out where to go is a key part of the experience of Metroidvanias, but when you can't even tell where you are because half of the rooms look identical, the experience of navigation becomes a lot more tedious. By the way, if you want to have your mind blown real quick, most of the Soulsborne games are actually Metroidvanias too. Yes, you have to stretch the definition a bit, but the world structure
Why do
pretty
we
much
have to
matches.
compare
Think
every
about
game
it.
to
The
other
interconnected
games?
world,
Like,
the backtracking,
other
the
games
locked
as their
doors,
own
the
genre,
progression via
like,
key
who
items.
cares?
It's all there. And I think a lot of that inspiration, to some extent, came from Kingsfield.
Why
and that's
not?
pretty
I don't
neat.
know, like...
Speaking of exploration, I do have to mention one big aspect of it that I did find pretty irritating.
Wow,
in
this game's
Fake
like this
walls.
game.
Now, if you played any of the Souls games, you should be pretty familiar with fake or illusory walls, right? The way they typically
Fuck
work is
fake
you find
walls.
a suspicious looking wall, you attack it, and there's a secret behind it. The real key with why I think this works is that there aren't too many of them, and there's also often some sort of environmental hint to help suggest to you that, hey, there might be a secret here. Kingsfield has neither of these. There are so
I don't
many fake
notice
walls,
those
and they are
hints.
often placed
I have to be
seemingly at
told.
random. Now, the effect that
chat
this has
or
on
by
gameplay is
text
that
on
you
the
end up
floor,
needing to
or I'm
mash
never
X
going
on
to find
every
it.
single wall of every single room and hallway in the game. And I'm not exaggerating here, I mean every room. So to be clear, I really do like secrets in games like this, but when you're required to rub your face against every wall, it becomes a lot less fun and a lot more tedious than it ought to be. With most games in the Souls series, it's very possible to beat them and have no idea what happened from a narrative perspective. Who did I just kill? Wait,
True.
what happened? Why am I doing this?
Who is this
The reason
guy?
can
Then I
happen
have to
is because
watch
the story
a
presents
3-hour
itself
video.
through little bits and pieces, and item descriptions and dialogue from NPCs scattered around, instead of something with more structure like cutscenes that lay it all out. That sort of story presentation may have taken inspiration from Kingsfield, because it is very much the same with this game. Just like Dark Souls, you can beat the final boss and say to yourself, wait, what exactly just happened? As for how the story is presented, you can come across NPCs and they'll explain little things. They mostly make sense, but there are a few localization gems here and there that are pretty entertaining. The way the NPCs are spread out and the way in which they say cryptic things to you definitely gives the game a Soulsy feel. This plus the general atmosphere gives an almost ethereal mood to the game. Like, yeah, just take this guy for example. He's, wait a minute.
What the?
Now, I want to give a quick mention to the fact that Kingsfield will absolutely let you soft lock yourself or just make the game way harder. The biggest example of this is how you can sell any item in the game, including important keys. If you really want to, the game will just let it happen. This reminded me of how the Souls games handle themselves. Like, hey, if you want to kill Andre and permanently make the game more difficult in the process, you're allowed to. And with both Kingsfield and Dark Souls, I can't help but respect that FromSoft has allowed for these scenarios. In my eyes, it shows a level of
And it
respect for the
fucks
players
the
by
whole
giving them this
game.
freedom to screw themselves over. You just very rarely see that these days. Also, I want to point out that if you do decide to do something, such as sell important keys, it's not like the game has tricked you into doing so. It simply gives you the choice and lets you suffer the consequences. And you know what? Maybe I'm crazy for liking something like that, but I do. Kingsfield is also pretty quirky. Not so much a Zoe Deschanel quirky, but more a, hey, the developers had some neat ideas quirky. So I want to highlight a couple. The first is this teleporting system. The way it works is you insert this key onto a pedestal found at save points, and then you can teleport back to this location using the corresponding gate in your inventory. Since you'll only have one key and one gate for most of your playthrough, this creates
would
an
never
interesting
figure this shit
risk-reward
out.
dynamic whenever you want to move the key. Since you physically have to pick up the key and move it to a new location, you lose your warping ability as a safety net while shifting it somewhere else. To add to this dynamic, there are quite a few areas in the game where if you fall into them, you'll actually be stuck and soft-locked unless you have a warp point set up. So overall, this adds an extra layer of decision making when exploring that I haven't quite seen in other games. The second cool idea I want to talk about involves the rhombus keys. So there are quite a few doors that require these rhombus keys to get through. Think of them as like your generic dungeon key.
So was
now,
this FromSoft's first game? No, right?
Doors
just their first
ways.
Souls-like game?
What I mean by that is that they require a key for each direction you enter through. And what's also interesting is that you can pick up these keys and reuse them. This creates scenarios where if you're clever with how you use and reuse keys, you can gain access to more areas. So yeah, I just thought this was pretty neat, and I'm honestly surprised I haven't seen something similar in a Zelda game. Unless I'm just forgetting, maybe? Alright, so there are a lot of gameplay mechanics central to the Souls series. Bonfires, an Estus flask, dodge rolls, making your character look like Shrek. But there's one that I feel gets overlooked sometimes.
My character's beautiful.
Backstabs. At their core, backstabs reward the player for getting behind an enemy by letting you do a lot of damage or even outright killing an enemy. Now, why am I talking about
yes, it
backstabs
is!
in a Kingsfield video?
She's beautiful!
Because Kingsfield certainly doesn't have them. Or does it? With Kingsfield, if you can manage to maneuver yourself behind certain enemies, you can basically just win because the enemies handle like tanks and can't turn fast enough. As you can see here, I get behind this guy and I just go at it. This is backstabbing in 1995.
Yeah, admit she's
now,
fucking
I'm not
beautiful.
claiming that Kingsfield
Admit she's beautiful.
backstabs in the Souls games, but I couldn't help but notice the parallels here and thought it'd be fun to point out. Now, fair warning, I'm going to talk about the final boss in this section, so feel free to skip ahead if you don't want to be spoiled.
I don't give a
Alright,
fuck.
we good? Okay, so you go into this arena and it's Necron himself,
It's
the guy
supposed to be
that
a
all the
she?
NPCs
Yeah, she's
have been
got
mentioning
titties.
constantly. Naturally, Necron starts doing some Street Fighter Shoryukens that launch magic missiles at you. At this point, I was sort of underleveled and undergeared, but I had fully accepted and embraced the jank of this game. So, I did the natural thing, and I ran into this little hole in the wall on the edge of the arena that protected me from the missiles while I shot 100 arrows into him for about 5 minutes. This actually worked, and naturally, I was pumped as hell. But this actually wasn't the end. Inexplicably, I wound up in the goddamn cyber zone for one more boss. And guess who it was? Kalameet. Yes, Kalameet
No
from
way!
Dark Souls 1. Granted, he's not called that in this game, but just look at the model.
Dang, they
It's
fucking
nearly the
recycled
same
his
design.
ass.
Not only that, but the famous Moonlight Greatsword from every Souls game is here too. As for the fight itself, it was 10 straight minutes of slapping him with my sword, spamming magic, and healing every 5 seconds because there were lasers and fire everywhere. Gameplay-wise,
All they do is
this pretty
recycle,
awful,
and
but
I fucking
whatever.
love it.
And eventually I got him.
We
And
all
he blasted
fucking
off like
love
Team
it.
Rocket.
We're
What
like,
was I
thank
saying?
you,
You're welcome.
FromSoft. Thank you
So
for
guess what I
doing it
didn't find out
again.
until after I beat the game and looked up some things that I missed. This game has unique magic sword attacks for all the special swords in the game. Now, I'm not surprised I didn't stumble across this because it requires some precise button inputs with finicky timing. And as far as I can tell, the game never hints at this even existing. To do one of them, it's tap X, tap square, hold triangle, very quickly. So first off, this is really cool. But then it got me thinking about secrets in games that are easy to miss, specifically in FromSoft's other games. In Demon's Souls, an example of this would be World Tendency. If you're playing blind, it's extremely easy to miss everything connected to this. In Dark Souls, an example would be something like Ash Lake. It's a genuinely breathtaking secret area, but it's again incredibly easy to miss. If you're a game
Did I go
developer,
there?
one of the most terrifying things you can do is work on something for hours or days or weeks or months and then have it
No?
never be seen by
Wait, I
someone who
missed
plays your
a
game.
whole
So it takes a
area?
lot of courage to hide big things like this for the players.
That's
But
insane.
the payoff is that the secrets they can uncover are really, really cool and actually worthwhile. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of this design
Damn.
sensibility when it comes to big secrets. It takes courage and
Yeah,
shows
I guess
respect
I
for the
gotta
players.
play it
And I'm
again,
happy
I
that
don't know.
FromSoft is still doing it with all their games to this day. So that's Kingsfield. It definitely shows its age in a lot of ways, and I'd honestly have a hard time recommending it to most people, but despite it all, there's some great nuggets of inspiration in terms of atmosphere and design that are worth looking at, especially within the context of FromSoft's more recent games. And like I said before, there's a lot of jank, but there's an undeniable charm and uniqueness that shines through. Also, I still think it's
They were
really
just
interesting as
getting
a piece of
started.
From Software's history, and it's fun to try and connect the dots
Do a
between where they were in
marathon stream and
1995
play this
where they are
game?
now in 2020. So
Oh,
yeah,
brother.
that's it. I hope you
What
found
is
my
this?
thoughts interesting or entertaining. I feel like this game very
Make
rarely
nuggets.
gets discussed, and I hope I did it justice.
Why do we have an emote for everything?
Oh hey, didn't see you there. I was just staring at the sponsored by Raycon text in the sky. It's me, Swolair. I used to be a chump.
Holy
but then I
fuck,
got
the
serious with
resting
my
is
body.
the sponsor. Yeah, that was pretty interesting. I didn't, for some reason, I never realized that they made a fuck ton of games before Dark Souls.